Hi, this is Malika Gardner of Evanston Live TV, and I have with me a candidate that is, well, actually, you're an incumbent
Yeah, of
on
6 months or so.
on District 65. Actually, I love her name, Soo La Kim.
Oh, thank you.
It sounds like a poem.
Oh, thank you. I'll tell my mom that.
It sounds like poetry to me. Um, gosh, there's there are so many candidates running right now. It's exciting though.
Yes,
It
yeah.
is exciting. So how are you feeling about um, running, having to run a campaign?
Yeah. Well, it's a new experience for me for sure. And as an introvert, it's not exactly what I would gravitate towards, being in the public eye and having to promote myself. But I am really interested in the service and in the work. I think it's really important, the work that the school board is doing. And I have great respect for my board colleagues. And I want to be part of making our schools better. So I'm motivated by that goal and willing to do as best I can in the campaign. So I'm learning as I go for sure.
Mm, mm. Well, I've heard great things about you.
Oh, thank you.
You seem to be respected. People love your energy, your personality,
Mhm.
and yeah. So I had questions that came in
Sure.
early here, so I'm going to pull those up, and of course I have my own.
Sure.
So one question that came in for you: what are the unique qualities that you bring to the board?
All right. Great question. Well, I guess, I've been in education all my life. I've always been interested in education. Um, you know, as an immigrant child, I came to the States when I was 6 years old. My family immigrated from Korea. Um, it was education. It was public education, the public library, the public parks, all the great public institutions that helped me learn and you know be a successful adult. I think those institutions are worth preserving and working for. So I have that experience as an immigrant who benefited from strong public schools and strong public institutions. And in my work as an educator, I see, I follow kind of higher education research and also K through 12 research. And I are, am very committed to establishing really strong that relationship between students and their teachers. And I think that's so critical. So I support the initiatives that the district is embarking on in that regard. So kind of understanding the education space, understanding some of the education research, and then the recent equity work that I've done. I've always been interested in the complicated history of America. I remember as a young child, my father, who was also a student of history, telling me, we're on stolen land. The narrative of, the founding of America with Christopher Columbus is more complicated than that. So I knew as a very young child that there was a much more complicated and violent history. So I was always interested in that, and I think those are the seeds of my interest in the equity work that I am involved in now, both in the community and on the board.
This is my own question.
Sure.
District 65 is the board has really been under attack from outside forces
Yeah.
with the work that you all are doing in terms of equity and building that bond, that relationship um, with the children,
Yeah.
and looking out for children of color.
Hmm.
The death threats coming in, and my heart goes out to you all.
Yeah.
Um, So, what are your thoughts on people who Evanstonians who are having so much to say about what the board isn't doing? What you know, when
Yeah.
meanwhile you all are getting death threats, so clearly you're doing something,
Yeah.
having an impact on people.
Yeah. I think it is a frightening time. I think I think what's going on in the national stage is connected to what's going on in our community for sure. And I think we've seen throughout that when there are real advances or efforts to push equity, especially around anti-racism, that there's going to be resistance and there's going to be pushback. And I think sometimes that pushback, when it is about race, which is such a sensitive topic, and the conversation gets amplified, um, and those outside our community pick up on that, I think that does lead to greater threats and greater danger. So it saddens me when there are attacks on our superintendent, on our board colleagues that can get, travel outside and then lead to um, further vitriol, I think. We saw that when with the Halloween incident last year, or was that 2 years ago, when many schools decided to do away with in-school celebrations of Halloween, partly due to equity issues. Uh, a disgruntled parent kind of took that story to the media. They picked it up. It got picked up nationally, um, and our principal got death threats. So I think we need to be mindful of the rhetoric and the words that we use when we um, disagree and when we have differing opinions.
Mm, okay. Yeah, I've been really really concerned um, about you all, and this is our first time meeting and talking, but trust and believe I've been praying over the board for
Thank you.
safety because we are in crazy times right now.
Yeah.
And I know you all have been working really hard to change the way things have been going, especially with the achievement gap and
Yeah.
um, dealing with COVID-19.
Yeah.
Like, what school board isn't trying to figure out how to handle this? So
Yeah.
I think, and I know Dr. Horton, he was reaching out to North Shore and getting information, and I know you all have been working very hard. So thank you.
Thank you for acknowledging that. Yeah.
Praying over you guys for your safety because we are in crazy times.
Yes.
Another question that come in: some have implied that there's not a return on investment with with District 65 equity work. What has been the impact? I know you just touched on that a little bit, but
Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah. I mean, I think, I guess there's two parts to that question. I think we're just getting started with some of our equity initiatives. I think it was in 2014 that the achievement report came out. And then shortly thereafter, there was the discipline report. So a lot of it was about getting data and then developing plans to, you know, put changes in place. And then the changes that I've seen as a parent before even coming on the board, there have been changes to the social studies curriculum. I'd like to see more, but I think there have been changes. Like when I compare my older child's third grade curriculum, where they were still talking about pioneers and pioneer days and things like that, and then my current third graders experience where they had a whole month unit on Native American culture and heritage and history. I think that's important, and that's we should keep moving in that direction. Um, and then, with Black Lives Matter Week coming up and LGBTQ Week coming up, that is the beginning of integrating a culturally responsive curriculum into our schools. And there was resistance to that as well. I think detracking math is really important. And that's been, steps have been made there as well. And we'll continue to do that to make math, a rigorous math curriculum accessible to all of our students. So those are the things that I see that we've done. There is much more to be done. We recently got the report, the special education report, that is also distressing in showing the inequities between Black and Brown students, and the evaluations and services they receive, and the learning that they can demonstrate versus white students. So I think there is a lot of work to be done, and I think Dr. Horton has come in and made organizational changes and that align with district priorities, and have put in place his Miracles framework that has equity at the center. And I want to support that. I think we need to see how that plays out. I think he just got here. He's dealing with a pandemic, but he's not losing sight of the equity priorities of the district. He is moving ahead on those goals, even during a global pandemic. And I think, my board colleagues and I want to support him in that.
Okay. Yeah, Dr. Horton had come to speak at my very first press conference on the legislation that I was working on to expand Black history, and
Yeah.
I mean, he really dropped some knowledge, and was already in the process of finding a curriculum for
Yeah.
exactly what the bill was about, HB 4954. So, I have a great deal of respect for Dr. Horton.
Yeah.
Um, okay, the other question, D65 is working to identify findings to its structural deficit. Some have
Mhm.
said that the district has been on a spending spree since the referendum. Is that true? How will you contribute to resolving this?
Yeah, I don't know where that spending spree claim comes from. I have also heard this kind of tax and spend rhetoric, or accusations of tax and spend, that I don't find to be accurate. The structural deficit is partly because there's only so much tax revenue, property tax revenue, that we can collect. We have a historically low CPI, the Consumer Price Index, that determines how much tax revenue can grow year to year. We're at a historic low. So that affects the revenue stream. Corporate tax, property taxes have been hit because the economy has been hit. I mean, I don't know how many businesses in Evanston have closed since March, and even shortly before. That affects our revenues. We're not collecting local fees like through after school programs and other ways that we've been able to collect a small percentage of our revenue. So all of our revenue streams have been hit, and the economic impacts of that are still to be foreseen. I think the budgets for the next couple of years peg CPI even lower than what the recently passed budget was calculated at. So that means, and in addition, we continue to have our contractual obligations that we do have to pay. The majority of our budget goes to instructional costs. And that's not going to change. So I think that's the challenge. I think, where do you find those savings, and where do you find those efficiencies around the areas that are fixed, So at the same time, we have to continue supporting our students. If there are additional, psychologists and therapists and specialists that we need to hire, we need to do that. So I think it is about balancing our obligations and priorities with the realities of our real constraints. I don't think I don't think that there's been a spending spree. I think if you look carefully at the budget, um, many of the new positions that have been created are budget neutral. And there is reorganization that any new leader wants to make to ensure that our educational goals are being met.
Mm. Um, have you watched the other interviews of your opponents?
I have. I think I'm pretty much caught up. I have tried to catch them all, just to see where their perspective and positions are. Yeah.
Do you have any responses to um, any of the opponents who are not incumbents?
Um, I mean, it seems that some of them do have very strong criticisms of the current board and the current leadership. It seems like most of it centers on COVID response and the reopening plans. And I understand the frustration of many of our families and parents that schools are remaining closed. You know, I think there are good reasons for that, and I think the cautious approach has been to protect everyone. Um, and but I think there have been these narratives that, oh, what have you been doing? Why haven't you been working on this? Or you know you failed our school. So I think that rhetoric, I'm not saying that the candidates themselves are saying that, but I think that that's kind of the discourse that I've heard. And I think that's, seeing how hard our district and cabinet and building leaders are working to prepare our schools and to work out the details, all the operational details of returning to school at all of our 18 buildings with all of their slightly different configurations and facilities, conditions, and things like that. I guess it does frustrate me a little bit to hear people say, well, what are you doing? You've done nothing. And I see the work that goes into managing this crisis. At the same time, that school leaders are also trying to ensure that students are engaging online and that they are learning as best they can in the remote setting. Ensuring that our students have enough to eat. Making sure to communicate about the meal pickups, getting grocery cards to them, connecting them to PTA and other resources. I think there's so much to managing this pandemic than just the reopening plans, which are incredibly important. I want my students to be, my own children to be back in school. Probably in the fall. I've chosen remote for my kids, when we do reopen. But by the fall, I would hope that we can all return to school safely, and nobody is saying that remote school is preferable to in-person. I think we all have the same goal.
Do you have any other responses? We're going to have the D65 forum.
Yes.
So, I'm looking forward to hearing those conversations between the candidates.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be your response to the other candidates and how they're viewing how you all are handling the budget, equity?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that I have specific responses to specific candidates because I can't remember who said what exactly at this point. But I guess from my own perspective and position, I don't think we can abandon equity goals in a crisis, right? I think it's even more important to look at things through an equity lens when you are hit with a crisis like this. So when things get hard, I think it's easy to say, well, we can't afford that right now. We can't We can't afford all of our equity initiatives, or we have to put a pause on that to attend to these other needs. I think I want to have the hard conversations about how we protect and prioritize our historically marginalized students while being responsible fiscal stewards. So I think that's the challenge, right? I think we can do that. I think we have to look at all the different. I think Joey Halpern said this in a finance meeting. We have to look at all of our programs and think about that ROI and think about whether our investments are paying off, or that we're seeing the results that we want to see, and what we want to continue investing in and what we want to not invest in. I think, and I heard Anya say, the referendum that passed in 2017 was supposed to give us 8 years of balanced budgets. In that time, we had to work to figure out a plan for that structural deficit, to rein in spending, to keep up, to keep pace with revenue. And this is that time. This is that time to do it. Now, the complication is that we've been hit with this pandemic that shrinks that window, that shrinks that 8-year window. So it's urgent. And I think all of my board colleagues and I are ready to have those hard conversations that we need to have. So, and I think to Dr. Horton's credit, again, he is trying to involve the community as much as possible, through the thought exchange and upcoming community forums. He wants to hear from the community about what are the community's priorities. What do they see as things worth protecting as much as possible, so that we can hear those thoughts. So I think his commitment to engaging all stakeholders is really admirable, and I support that.
And what would you say are the main priorities for the board right now? We're in 2021. We just had absolute insanity.
Yeah.
National Guard coming to guard all the Capitol buildings. COVID is in its second wave, and the vaccine is here. So what are the priorities right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're focused on reopening schools, and I think that is the immediate priority. And then the medium-term priority is the fall, preparing for the fall, and what should we be doing in the summer months to help our students who have experienced the most learning loss, or who have experienced, who haven't really been able to engage in remote learning, who have missed out on services, or it's been uneven. So I think we have to think about how we support those students, and how we then create that plan for reopening schools in the fall for everybody. What does that look like? We will probably have to still practice social distancing measures. Not everyone will be fully vaccinated, but hopefully our our educators and building staff will have access to the vaccine. That is my hope, and so that they feel safe returning. And I think that's, how you roll that out and how you do that in a safe way is the next challenge. But I think continuing to have these budget conversations is, has to go on in the background as we move through the year. We can't put it off. So I think that needs to be happening at the same time. And then, again, those budget conversations are about our priorities and our values, right? So they can't be separated from each other. So as we're having those budget conversations, it really is going to be about what are the board's priorities moving forward among the different equity goals that we have, right? In the next year, in the next 2 years, in the next 5, 10 years, what do we want to see happen? I think that needs to be more clearly articulated among us, and then communicated with the community.
Mhm. What would be your advice or message to your opponents who never served on District 65?
Mm. Um, I think getting involved, what has helped me to learn more about how the board functions and what its responsibilities are just to start paying attention to the conversations that are happening on the board, attend board meetings, or view board meetings and proceedings, or at least, look at our agendas. It's all available, these are all public documents. The first time that I engaged with the board was several years ago, when some parents did want to change the social studies curriculum. And it was really organizing around that, and speaking at a board meeting. Um, and, and then being involved in some of the conversations around equity and the history of that within the district, right? I think this opportunity gap did not just come out of nowhere. It's been persistent. As I understand it, it's been persistent for decades. So I think learning the history of that, and then what was really informative for me was when we had John Diamond and Amanda Lewis speak to the school communities a couple of years ago. They're the authors of Despite the Best Intentions, How Racism Thrives in Good Schools. And their research really speaks to how communities like ours, diverse communities where diversity is touted and where diversity is valued and seen as a great thing, still seem to have these inequities that persist, and they're very stubborn. And how opportunity hoarding and resource hoarding by more privileged parents exacerbate these things, how policies and practices that look race neutral on paper, right, in their implementation or in their practice, can lead to unequal outcomes, along racial lines. So I think knowing the history, knowing the research around how these kinds of educational equities persist, it gives you a more accurate roadmap about what to pay attention to, right? What data you need to make those informed decisions. And then, reading how often there's this attention to, what are the Black and brown families doing wrong? This kind of blaming the families for the persistent gaps, or the this model of lack, right? It's something that these families lack. But really, we need to be looking at what are the schools lacking, or how are the schools set up that lead to these uneven outcomes, even when they've gone through the school system. If we're offering a good service, and if we're offering a quality education, we should see growth, we should see learning. So we need to focus on what we're doing as an institution, and looking at those policies and practices.
There's so many theories out there about the achievement gap, what caused the achievement gap, what's feeding into the achievement gap.
Mm-hmm.
So many people, believe it's, that children of color aren't celebrated in the classrooms, or the teachers are too hard on them, that things just aren't equal and fair in the classroom. So therefore, it has an impact on their self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
on them wanting to even go to class
Mm.
because it's not a great experience. So they don't want to go back, or when they go, they're just not really present. Um, so, I've heard complaints like that. I've heard it's uh, children just needing to really know who they are,
Mhm.
and that's something that they have to get from home as well as in the curriculum,
Yeah.
um, the history curriculum. I've heard that. I've heard so many things, and they all probably play a part. At least the two that I just mentioned. Um, what are your thoughts as to
Yeah.
where it began?
Well, I think, it begins in, school systems designed to, from the histories, from our American history, to serve white families first, best and foremost. The as you said, the social studies curriculum was very Eurocentric. Um, you know, and I think, as I said, policies that seem race neutral, but then when applied, for example, discipline data that we get that shows this disparate treatment. Um, and I think, I heard, again, as I said, I learned so much from Anya, and I heard Anya say, like, do we accept and value everyone in how they show up in the classroom? You talk about, feeling validated, or feeling, um, seen when they're in the classroom. I think if you have a school culture that values one set of, um, you know, cultures or characteristics or whatever, then you're going to not see, you're going to, um, devalue other cultures. So I think we have to look at all of those aspects. We have to look at curriculum. Is the curriculum responsive and inclusive? And I've seen research about how teaching math in this kind of isolated, decontextualized way doesn't work for a lot of students. It doesn't mean those students are bad at math. It, Maybe we need to look at how we're teaching math, you know. Um, and so there's curriculum, but there's really the culture and climate piece, right? Which I think the Dr. Horton is really focusing on, and which I'm really interested to see how he carries out the culture and climate piece, because I think that's so important. Um, and when I think about back to my own public school experience as a 6-year-old speaking no English, in a new kindergarten classroom, um, what I experienced was a very nurturing environment. There wasn't extensive ESL programming, but there was individual attention that teachers gave me at specific moments, that helped me learn the language very quickly, and then participate. That there was this kind of warm attention. Like, when I think about my elementary school years, what I think about is this warm, nurturing attention. You know, I think every child deserves that. We want to know, are they getting that in the classroom? And I think that, we all have implicit bias. We all have um, ways that we've been socialized, right? Ways that we have developed, and how we respond to conflict, how we respond to certain kinds of behaviors, how we read certain, people. I think all of those things factor in. So I want to focus on how can we support really healthy, nurturing relationships between all of our educators and our students, our administrators, and our families, right? All those points of interaction. Are we interacting in a human and humane way to everyone?
Mm. It's interesting you had brought up math because I started out great at math in grade school. Then when we got to algebra, like my brain just did not compute. I was like,
Yeah. There was a certain point where I was just like pre-calculus. Ah. And then and when I got to college, I just avoided all math courses, and I kind of regret that. I wish I had taken more risks. Yeah,
yeah, people would say, well, you're not going to need any of that stuff, later on. But actually, having a great understanding of numbers and formulas really does help you just in basic life, not just
absolutely.
accounting or handling your bills, but just the working out problems, working
Yeah.
out solutions. And I wish that was really explained, in school, like how this is really going to apply. It doesn't matter if you're an engineer, architect, an accountant, but how you work through solutions is life.
Yeah, and I hope we can do more of that kind of integrated math. Well, really with all subjects where you contextualize it. That's what I was talking about thinking about different creative ways to teach math. For example, during this pandemic, we've been baking a lot more with our third grader who has an interest in baking, and what a great way to learn fractions, right? So we're telling him to read the measurements. It says 1.5 cups. Well, you can use the half cup. How many half cups is 1.5 cups? And he has to kind of figure that out. It's very tactile. It's applied. And at the end, you have a product, a finished product that you can be proud of. And it's math based, right? So I think there are ways that we can think about our curriculum, um, to make it more accessible to more of our students and rigorous. I don't think those are mutually exclusive at all. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and then you and I were talking about Columbia College, how much we love Columbia. So you
Yeah.
have students like that who are very creative and artistic, and so some of I don't know. I always felt like the school system, me growing up, the
Hmm.
school system didn't really nurture the creative types. We
Yeah.
see things very differently than
Hmm.
most people.
Yeah.
We're not the academias, but we do see life just a little more abstract, a little
Hmm.
more color in there. So, how do you all deal with that? Because sometimes I think that plays into the achievement gap as well, because
Yeah.
some kids just see math differently. They
Yeah.
need to be explained math differently. They need to explain English literature a little differently,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, and I think, who's in there with them every day? It's our educators. So I think our educators need professional development opportunities and support, and given room to be creative in the classroom and to really um, use their expertise in observing their students and saying, well, this kind of approach doesn't work with the student. Let me try something different. And I think, in my own work in faculty development in higher education, um, the most effective faculty development is getting educators together to share ideas, right? When you can bounce ideas off with your fellow educators and problem solve, um, that is much more effective than like going to a seminar and being, like
Hmm.
being, lectured to about, maybe there is, we always learn from others. We always learn from experts and research and stuff like that. But I think the classroom practice, how are we building opportunities for educators to work with each other and to problem solve and to try out new things in the classroom? Um, and I think that's critically important. I think that's why we built in the, you know, um, half day with this remote learning, because remote learning is a new way to teach for most of our educators. How do we give them room to get together, adjust, adapt? And I've seen those adaptations. My middle schoolers, he goes into his room with his iPad, and I have very little like window into his experience because he doesn't tell me very much at all. Um, but then his teachers started, I think they realized maybe that gap in communication. So they started sending a weekly, like kind of brief, like an email, like here's what's due, here's what you're missing. And so I could kind of give that nudge to my student. And that didn't happen from the beginning, but I think teachers were adjusting and figuring things out as well. So I think they need that opportunity and support to do that.
I only have you for 5 more minutes. So
Okay, that was fast.
oh, no, I got to get one more question in there. Um, I've seen, well, I have friends who, have kids in District 65 or they've been
Mhm.
going to ETHS, but it was like one one of their children I felt like definitely should not have passed.
Mm,
Should not have passed. I mean, I have no idea why they kept moving her along.
yeah.
And then the other one was absolutely brilliant
Hmm.
and should have probably skipped a grade, but they wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
Um, how does a parent? Um, I think I think most parents do not want to deal with the shame of their kid being left back.
Sure.
So they go with the program, just allow the school to just continue moving them along. But I know when they got to ETHS, they were not really prepared.
Yeah.
Uh, Whereas the other was kind of held back. Her talents were held back.
Hmm.
And so then she's became a problem in the class. So then they were like, oh, then she needs to be in special needs. No, she's
Yeah.
brilliant. You've acknowledged she's bored.
Yeah.
So why would you then put her in a behavioral situation?
Yeah. I mean, I think that sounds to me as we need to be better at assessing our students, right? We need to be better at assessing and providing feedback to students and families. Um, you know, to me, school isn't about performance. It's not about grades. In my own teaching with freshman writing, where students are so nervous about their first college grades, I always had to have this conversation about don't focus on the grades, like focus on what you need to do to learn the thing that we need you to learn, and the grade will take care of itself. What do students need in order to learn? They need good feedback, not just good instruction, but then once they do something, what kind of feedback do they get? So the student who kind of got passed along, I would wonder, did she ever get honest feedback about her performance, about her work? Did the families get honest feedback about where they needed more help and they needed more support, versus where they were strong, right? So I would want to evaluate what were the assessments that happened and what kind of feedback was given, similar to the excelling student. When a behavior comes up, what is the behavior telling us about what the student needs, right? Instead of just tackling the behavior, we have to try to understand where it's coming from, but also assessing more accurately where their abilities are, right? So I would want to, yeah, look at that. Look at how we're giving feedback to students, how educators are, um, evaluating students both in the classroom and in their work, right? Yeah, and it's hard work. That is the hard work of teaching and education. And that's why we say small class sizes are important and individual attention is important, because that's where teachers learn about their students and can provide the feedback and support that students need in order to learn, right? And I think it's not just because small class sizes in and of themselves doesn't mean learning, but what it allows is the additional time and attention that teachers can use to assess and learn who their students are. I think the best teachers are those who are always trying to learn more about their students, like what makes them tick, what works for them, what do they need in this moment and not in, when do they need to be pushed and when do they need to be praised and built up, right? So I think, when I watch really great teachers, that's what they all have, is that constant feedback loop, right, with their students, with their learners. And we want that to happen in every classroom. We want to support our educators and to allow them to do that work.
Well, our time is up, but I did want to get just one more
Yes,
question in,
yes.
one more, just one more. The social workers
Mhm.
in District 65. Now I know some great ones, and I've witnessed some that I just did not think handled
Mhm.
the situation very well.
Yeah.
So, how do you all assess those? Because I think the social workers play a um, huge part in
Yeah.
how children feel about themselves,
Um,
and even how the family is grasping the reality of what's actually happening.
sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, and if it weren't this pandemic, I would love to meet more of our staff and professional staff and educators, and talk to them and hear their experience. And I hope I'll get an opportunity to do that if I remain on the board. But yes, I think there needs to be, just as there needs to be ongoing support and professional development of our educators, certainly for our staff, right? Social workers, psychologists, reading specialists, everyone who's interacting with students and families need ongoing development, need cultural competencies, right? To address uh, how to interact with families in again in a full humane way, right? And to understand maybe the implicit biases that might be influencing that relationship. I know that in dealing in my own work with faculty and students, when issues flare up, there's always this moment where things can get escalated because of the way you respond,
Hmm.
or you can respond in a different way that shows that you're really hearing what the other person is saying. Um, and we have to always be aware of that power dynamic. So we always try to remind our faculty, yes, we know the student is frustrating. Yes, we know they're misrepresenting some of their, what the situation is. Yes, we know they turned in that assignment late and they're arguing that they didn't, that there are, yes, there are some, you have some legitimate points, but they also have a grievance that we have to hear. And you are in a different power relationship with that student. So you have to maybe step back and respond in a compassionate way, right? And so that's what we work on coaching our faculty to do. And I think similarly, we want to provide our staff with that kind of support as well, because it can be stressful. It's difficult and stressful. But I'll just, do we have time for one anecdote?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I observed, again, this was before I was on the board, and just as a parent, I think there are little things that you might not even know is hurtful or harmful, that maybe an outside eye can see sometimes. My husband and I were sitting in the hallway of our son's school waiting for a parent-teacher conference. Um, Another parent was there with her child, and I think it was a staff member, a social worker, somebody um, came and talked to the mother of color, about her son in the hallway and um, the behaviors and stuff. And I felt very uncomfortable overhearing this conversation. Um, and afterwards, I turned to my husband and I say, what did you think about that? I didn't, I didn't think that that provided that parent with the dignity that they needed to have that conversation, right? Um, I felt, that we shouldn't have been there privy to that conversation. And my husband turned to me and said, I don't think that would have happened if it had been us. That there was this um, maybe lack of providing privacy. So I did write to our principal saying, this is what I observed. This is what I hope would happen. Is there a different way that could have been handled? So sometimes I think it's very little things. That's what I mean about culture and climate. That's what I mean, in my platform about a culture of care, where we really attend to those kinds of human interactions and making sure that everyone is treated with dignity, and the way that we would want to be treated, um, in those sensitive situations. So that's a specific example that comes to mind.
Well, that's yeah, that's part of. I've seen what you're talking about. I've seen that. I have seen that, and dignity is very important because yes, people will react to at least being embarrassed as a parent or humiliated.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then the whole uh, point is the child, so that gets lost.
Yeah.
That gets lost in it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
for this
Soo La Kim.
opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. I love saying your whole name. It sounds so poetic to me, Soo La Kim. It's beautiful.
Thank
And
you.
what I've heard about you is that you are a beautiful person. So
Oh, thank
it's
you.
been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you.
I look forward to meeting you in person
Yes.
sometime.
Yes. So I'll see you on the 20th for the
Yes, that's right.
forum. And I can't wait to hear, you all interact. And
Yeah.
yeah,
All right.
but I think you all have done a great job,
Thank you
D65,
so much.
considering all that you are up under death threats and a
Yeah.
deadly pandemic.
Yeah. I
So,
did not expect that when I applied for this role. It was like right before. I don't know what I would have said if they'd said, this is what you're signing up for. But
yes, yes. Well, I thank you so much and look forward to speaking with you again.
thank you so much, Malika.
And
Bye-bye.
please let people know where they can contact you.
Yes. Where should I do that?
Uh,
In the
you can say it here, and I'm going to
Oh,
put it in the
yes.
description.
I have a Facebook page, Soo La Kim for Evanston Skokie School Board, and I also have a website, Soo La Kim for D65, FORD65.com. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Soo La Kim. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, this is Malika, Evanston Live TV. That was Soo La Kim. She's running for District 65. And I will put the description in the description where you all can contact her to get more of your questions answered. And stay tuned. We will have more candidates for District 65 coming up, as well as the D65 Forum on January 20th. So stay tuned here at Evanston Live TV.